I never planned to destroy her life. But when I walked into that glass-walled conference room and saw my girlfriend, my Rachel, half undressed with my boss, something inside me snapped in a way that would never heal right again. People say betrayal changes you. That's true, but they never tell you how quietly it happens, how your heartbeat slows instead of racing, how the anger doesn't burn hot, but cold, measured, almost scientific. I didn't scream that night. I didn't even speak. I just watched, memorizing every detail like an engineer studying a blueprint for collapse. It was raining again in San Francisco. Not the cinematic kind of rain that drips romantically against windows, but the weary kind, the kind that seeps into your coat, into your bones, into your life. I left the apartment early that morning, half awake, coffee sloshing in a chipped mug, the elevator humming like a tired confession. Rachel was still in bed, the glow of her phone lighting up her face. I remember the reflection of that screen in her eyes. Something distant, something cold. Helios Dynamics, my company, was sinking. We had dreams of changing the world with renewable microgrids, but now we were barely paying for electricity in our own office. I had been running on caffeine anxiety and a kind of naive hope that somehow hard work alone could patch over cracks that were already turning into canyons. Rachel didn't see it that way. "You're killing yourself for a company that doesn't even believe in you," she told me last night. Dreams don't pay rent, Daniel. I wanted to tell her that they paid something, that they gave me meaning, that they were the only thing separating me from becoming just another man in a suit counting down the hours till death. But her words hung heavier than I expected. She had this way of saying things that made me feel like I was already losing. At the office, the rain streaked down the glass walls like veins. Marcus was waiting near the entrance, sharp as ever. Expensive suit, perfect smile. He was my senior manager and technically my friend, though lately, his smile seemed to carry small knives. He clapped me on the back. "Rough night?" he asked. "Something like that." He chuckled. "You should bring Rachel to the company dinner next week. Everyone misses seeing her." That night came faster than I wanted. The restaurant was all warm lights and soft jazz. Rachel showed up late. Her dress was red, the kind that commanded attention, and for a moment I forgot everything else. She kissed my cheek, her perfume sweet and deliberate. When she smiled, everyone at the table smiled too, even Marcus. He complimented her, not once but twice, his voice a shade too smooth. "That color suits you, Rachel. You light up the whole room." She laughed, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, and for a second, her hand touched his sleeve. Maybe it was innocent, but something inside me shifted. A flicker. A small crack in the glass of trust I'd built for years. After dinner, I said nothing. She held my arm, but her warmth felt like performance. In the car, silence pressed between us until she sighed. "You're overthinking again," she said, staring out the window. "I'm just tired." "You're always tired." Her tone hardened. "Maybe if you spent less time chasing impossible projects, you wouldn't be." I gripped the steering wheel tighter. "I just need a break." She turned to me, eyes sharp under the glow of the dashboard. "You need a breakthrough, Daniel." The rest of the drive home was a blur of taillights and quiet resentment. The next morning, I woke before her. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still gray, heavy with unspoken things. She was scrolling again, social media, this time. I watched from the kitchen as she double-tapped a photo of her friend posing beside a white Tesla, another on a beach in Greece. "Everyone's moving forward," she muttered. "Except us." I wanted to tell her that success isn't a race, that we'd get there somehow. But the words died in my throat. Instead, I put on my jacket and kissed her forehead. She didn't look up from her phone. At Helios, the lights flickered when I walked in. The servers were acting up again, another thing we couldn't afford to fix. I sat at my desk, staring at the design blueprints I'd been refining for months. Compact, low-cost battery grids that could bring power to communities off the main network. It was beautiful, at least to me. But beauty didn't pay the bills either. Marcus stopped by around noon, leaning against my cubicle wall with that same confident smirk. "You should really take Rachel on a trip. Somewhere nice. She deserves it." I forced a smile. Maybe when the next paycheck doesn't bounce. He laughed. Come on, man. You only live once. He left before I could respond, but something about his tone felt heavier than the words themselves. That night, I stayed late again, staring at the dim glow of my monitor until my eyes blurred. The office was quiet, almost too quiet. I thought about Rachel. The way she used to smile when I came home late with sketches in my hand. The way she used to believe in me. Now, even her laughter felt borrowed. When I finally returned home, she was already asleep, or pretending to be. Her back was to me, her breathing steady, almost rehearsed. I stood there for a long moment, watching the rise and fall of her shoulder, wondering when exactly we'd started drifting apart. I wanted to reach out, to pull her close, to find that familiar rhythm again, but I couldn't. The air between us was colder than the rain outside. I lay down beside her, eyes open to the ceiling. The sound of distant thunder echoed through the city. I thought about Helios, about the dwindling accounts, about Marcus's hand brushing against her arm, about the way she said breakthrough as if it were a threat. Sleep didn't come easily that night. When it finally did, I dreamed of glass shattering, sharp, bright, endless. It was close to midnight when I remembered the flash drive. A stupid thing, really, a small black stick with my prototype files, left plugged into one of the office computers. I almost ignored it. The rain was still falling, the streets slick and empty, the city lights bleeding through the mist. But something about the thought of that drive, everything I'd poured into those blueprints, made me turn the car around. Helios Dynamics was a tomb at that hour. The security guard barely looked up as I swiped my badge and stepped inside. The hallway smelled faintly of coffee and ozone. The hum of the servers echoed down the corridor, a mechanical heartbeat in the dark. I remember thinking how peaceful it felt, the kind of peace that comes before a storm. As I turned the corner toward my office, I heard laughter. Soft at first, then clearer. A woman's voice I knew too well. Rachel. For a second, I froze. My mind scrambled for logic. Maybe she'd stopped by to surprise me. Maybe Marcus, or one of the others, had called her about something work-related. But as I moved closer, the laughter changed, softer, more intimate. The kind of sound that doesn't belong in an office after midnight. Through the glass walls of the conference room, I saw them. Marcus was leaning against the long table, shirt half unbuttoned, that smug grin still painted on his face. Rachel sat on the edge of the table, legs crossed, her red dress, the same one from the company dinner, draped carelessly over her thigh. She held a glass of wine, probably from the minibar in his office, and looked at him with a smile that used to belong to me. For a moment, the reflection in the glass was all I saw, me standing there in the hallway, staring at a version of my life I didn't recognize. It was almost beautiful in its cruelty. My heart didn't race. It slowed, like the world had forgotten how to move. He said something, and she laughed again, leaning forward, touching his chest. His hand slid along her thigh in a motion so familiar it made my stomach twist. She didn't stop him. When she finally noticed me, the change in her face wasn't shock. It wasn't guilt. It was irritation. She set her glass down with a clink and exhaled. Daniel. Marcus straightened up, but didn't move away. Hey man, this isn't. Don't, I said. Just one word. It came out quieter than I expected. Rachel stood up slowly, smoothing her dress as if this were some petty inconvenience. You shouldn't be here. I work here, I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. She looked at me then, really looked, but not with love. Not even with regret. Just that cool detachment she'd been perfecting over the last few months. Did you really think I'd stay with you forever, Daniel? I blinked. What? You're a good man, she said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. But good doesn't pay the bills. I'm tired of waiting for you to become something. Marcus opened his mouth to speak, but she cut him off. No, he needs to hear it. I could feel something cracking inside me, a slow and steady fracture. Rachel, you could have just told me. She smiled sadly, almost pitying. You're nothing but a failure in a cheap suit. There it was. The truth, clean and sharp, slicing through whatever was left of me. I didn't say another word. There was nothing to fight for. No scene to make. No dignity to salvage. I turned, walked out of the conference room, and left them there, her lipstick smudged, his hand still resting where mine once did. The rain greeted me outside like an old friend. It poured down, cold and merciless, soaking my clothes in seconds. The city lights blurred, every color bleeding into the next, red, white, gold, until it all looked like static. I walked without direction, the sound of my footsteps drowned by thunder. By the time I reached my car, I couldn't tell if I was shivering from the cold or from the silence she left behind. I sat there for a long time, staring at my hands on the steering wheel. They looked foreign, the hands of a man who'd built something fragile and watched it crumble. I thought about calling her, asking why, begging maybe, but every word I could imagine her saying felt rehearsed, inevitable. I started the engine instead. The wipers squealed against the windshield, pushing away the rain only for it to return a moment later. A perfect metaphor for us, I thought bitterly. Temporary clarity swallowed by the same storm. When I reached home, I didn't turn on the lights. The apartment felt hollow, stripped of her scent already. The bed looked untouched, the couch too large. I poured myself a drink, whiskey something old, and stood by the window, watching the street lights flicker through the downpour. I should have felt rage. I should have wanted to destroy something, to scream, to confront. But all I felt was emptiness, like my body was just a container for pain I couldn't process yet. Somewhere between midnight and dawn, I sat on the floor beside my desk, the flash drive still clutched in my hand. It felt ridiculous, how much meaning I'd given to that tiny piece of plastic. Maybe it was symbolic, the last fragment of who I used to be. I thought of her laughter again, the way it echoed in that sterile conference room. I wondered if I'd ever stop hearing it. Outside, the rain softened to a whisper. I closed my eyes and listened, waiting for the world to start again. The days after that night bled together, colorless and heavy. Time lost its shape. Mornings felt like evenings, and evenings never ended. I moved through them half awake, like a ghost haunting the ruins of his own life. Every sound reminded me of her. The whisper of water from the faucet, the echo of my shoes on the hardwood. Even silence carried her name. I quit Helios Dynamics 3 days later. There wasn't much left to resign from. The company had been on life support for months anyway. Marcus didn't return my message. I didn't expect him to. His kind never looked back. They just stepped over whatever they broke and kept climbing. The HR rep looked uncomfortable as she slid the exit paperwork across the desk. "You're a talented engineer, Daniel," she said. "You'll land somewhere better." I smiled, or tried to. Sure. I left my ID badge on the desk, still damp from my hand. Outside, the city was all steel and noise. It looked the same as it always did, but I didn't belong in it anymore. I sold my car the next morning, almost impulsively. Watching someone else drive it away felt like losing another piece of myself, but it also felt freeing, like shedding a skin that no longer fit. I spent the next week inside my apartment, blinds drawn, laptop open but untouched. My engineering sketches were scattered across the table, old ideas, half-finished designs. They stared back at me like quiet accusations. Helios had once been my dream, a place where I could build something that mattered. Now, every blueprint was a reminder of my failure. Rachel's words looped in my head until they became a kind of rhythm. "You're a failure in a cheap suit. Dreams don't pay the bills. You're a good man, but good doesn't pay the bills." I drank too much. Not to forget, but to remember more softly. The whiskey blurred the edges of her face, turned her voice into background noise. But when the bottle was empty, she came back sharper than ever. Some nights, I caught myself scrolling through her social media, torturing myself with images of her new life. Photos of wine glasses, city skylines, luxury cars. Marcus appeared in a few, never tagged, never obvious, but there. His hand, his watch, his reflection in a window. They weren't even hiding it. Why would they? The world moved on without me. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I turned off my phone, unplugged everything, and sat in the dark. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. I looked around and realized I owned nothing that mattered. The furniture, the gadgets, even the view from the window. All of it felt like props from someone else's life. I wanted to destroy it all, to erase the version of myself that still hoped she'd walk back through that door. Instead, I picked up one of my sketches, a design for a modular microgrid battery system, drawn on cheap paper, and just stared at it. The lines were clean, simple. I remember the night I'd drawn it, the excitement that had burned in my chest like a secret fire. That feeling felt alien now. Somewhere between exhaustion and despair, a strange thought crept in. If I could be broken this badly, maybe I could rebuild myself too. It wasn't courage. It was survival instinct. A quiet refusal to let the story end here. The next morning, I packed a single suitcase, clothes, laptop, the flash drive I'd retrieved that night, and left the keys on the counter. I didn't leave a note. There was no one to read it. I drove south first, no destination, just the hum of the highway and the endless gray horizon. The radio played songs I didn't recognize. Somewhere past Los Angeles, the clouds finally broke, sunlight spilling over the asphalt like a promise I didn't believe in yet. I kept driving. By the time I reached Austin, Texas, my wallet was thinner, my car seat stained with coffee, and my head strangely clear. The city had an energy San Francisco had long since lost. Young, raw, chaotic. Startups, small bars, late-night diners, full of people who looked like they'd risked everything for something that didn't exist yet. That's what I needed, anonymity. A reset button. I found a small apartment on the east side, nothing fancy, just a single room with a view of a cracked parking lot. The landlord didn't ask questions. I didn't offer any answers. I slept for 12 hours straight that first night, and when I woke up for the first time in months, I didn't think about Rachel. I thought about blueprints. I pulled out my old sketches again. They were wrinkled from travel, smudged from rain and whiskey, but still there, still mine. I spread them out across the floor like a puzzle and started to redraw them, line by line. Something inside me shifted. The ache was still there, but now it had purpose. Every line I drew felt like reclaiming something she'd taken from me. My focus, my confidence, my fire. I filed for a provisional patent a week later. Used the last of my savings to rent a desk in a dusty co-working space downtown. The coffee was terrible, the chairs worse, but it felt like a cathedral to me, a place where I could rebuild from ashes. I didn't know it then, but that tiny corner desk in Austin would become the birthplace of something far bigger than I could imagine. Something that would make Rachel's words echo back on her one day. But in that moment, I wasn't thinking about revenge or redemption. I was just thinking about survival. And maybe, just maybe, the faint outline of hope. Austin smelled like rain and burnt coffee. The air carried that peculiar blend of exhaustion and ambition. People working late, chasing dreams that might never pay off. I fit right in. The co-working space I rented was barely more than a converted warehouse. Exposed brick, creaky floors, mismatched furniture. My corner desk sat beneath a flickering light that buzzed like a dying bee. The first few weeks were chaos, unpaid bills, rejection emails, insomnia. Still, something inside me stayed lit. I called the project Revita. It meant to revive, to give life. I liked the sound of that. The concept was simple but ambitious, a modular microgrid system that could power remote areas independently of the main grid. I wanted to design something clean, cheap, and scalable. Something that proved I wasn't the failure Rachel had described that night. But the reality of starting from zero was brutal. I'd sit there at that desk for hours, scribbling formulas and redrawing schematics until my wrist cramped. The room was always too hot or too cold, the Wi-Fi unstable, the coffee stale. Yet each line of code, each curve of a blueprint felt like a small resurrection. Some nights, I'd catch myself staring at the window, remembering her voice. The way she'd say my name when she wanted something. The way she'd sigh when she didn't believe in me. It still burned, that mix of love and contempt, but it also pushed me. I wanted to prove her wrong, not with words, but with results. One evening, when I was down to my last $100, I was sketching new storage architecture on a napkin when someone stopped beside my desk. A woman's voice said, "You know you can't patent something written on a coffee napkin, right?" I looked up. She was standing there in a cream blazer and black jeans, a tablet tucked under her arm, dark hair pulled back, sharp brown eyes that seemed to read everything at once. "Sophia Morales," she said, extending her hand. "I've seen you here the last few weeks. You work like you're being chased." I shook her hand, managing a weak smile. "Maybe I am." She pulled out the chair across from me, without asking. "So what's this?" "Some kind of power grid." I hesitated. "A microgrid. A decentralized network of self-sustaining batteries. I'm trying to reduce transmission loss and make energy storage portable." She raised an eyebrow. "Trying." "Testing," I corrected. "I'm testing." She smiled slightly, the kind of smile that wasn't flirtation, but curiosity. "Do you have funding?" I laughed. "Does caffeine count?" That made her laugh too. It was the first real laugh I'd heard in weeks, and something about it felt grounding. She studied me for a moment. "You've got that look, the one founders have right before they either build something incredible or burn out completely. Which one do you think I am?" "Too early to tell." She tapped her tablet. "Send me your pitch deck when you have one. I might know someone who'd listen." She left me her card, just a white rectangle with her name and an email. S. Morales, Venture Strategies. For the next 2 days, I barely slept. I built a presentation from scratch, cleaned up my prototype code, and even managed a simulation run that didn't crash halfway through. When I finally sent her the pitch, I expected silence. Instead, she replied the same night, "Let's meet. Tomorrow, 8 a.m. The meeting took place at a cafe that smelled like ambition and desperation in equal measure. Sophia listened quietly as I spoke, occasionally interrupting with precise, brutal questions. "What's your scalability ratio? How are you planning to manufacture components? What's your IP strategy?" I stumbled a few times, but she didn't seem to mind. When I finished, she sipped her espresso and said, "You're not ready for investors." The words hit like a punch. "I know," I said softly. "But," she added, setting down the cup, "you're closer than you think. You've got the right obsession. You just need structure." She leaned forward, her eyes steady. "I'll help you, Daniel. Not because I believe in your product, yet, but because I believe in people who don't know how to quit." And just like that, Revita Energy was born. We filed the paperwork together that week, splitting equity 50-50. Sophia handled the business side, investors, networking, the kind of polished chaos I could never stomach, while I focused on design. The first prototype was rough, barely holding together with duct tape and faith, but when the first battery powered a single lamp for 6 hours straight, I felt something I hadn't in months: pride. Sophia caught me staring at the glow of that lamp, smiling like a fool. "Feels good, doesn't it?" she said. "It feels real," I whispered. That night, as we locked up the workspace, I noticed how the streetlight reflected in her hair, how her perfume lingered in the air between us. It wasn't attraction, not yet, but there was something electric in the silence that followed. Back in my apartment, I poured myself a drink, but I didn't finish it. For the first time since Rachel, I didn't need alcohol to feel alive. I fell asleep surrounded by blueprints, the name Revita Energy scribbled in the corner of every page. When I woke up the next morning, I knew this was only the beginning. The ashes had cooled. The rebuilding had begun. 2 years. That's how long it took for Revita Energy to crawl from an idea on napkins to a company that people in the energy world actually whispered about. 2 years of caffeine, failure, rejection, and tiny miraculous breakthroughs that made it all worth it. Sophia and I worked side by side, day and night. Our office was still modest, just a larger space with second-hand desks and a few humming prototypes in the corner. But there was a pulse in the air now. A rhythm. The smell of solder and ambition mixed with burnt coffee and sleepless dreams. Our first big success came with the Revita Core, a small modular battery pack that could store solar energy and be stacked like bricks. It wasn't revolutionary by global standards, but for off-grid communities in Mexico and rural Texas, it was everything. A cheap, durable power source that could light homes, run water pumps, or charge devices. When we demonstrated it for the first time, Sophia's hand brushed mine as the LEDs flickered on. She smiled, that confident, dangerous smile of hers. "You did it, Daniel." "We did it," I almost said. But I didn't. Because, in truth, I wasn't sure if I could have done it without her. The investors started calling soon after. They wanted meetings, dinners, contracts. I still hated that side of things, the performative optimism, the way people pretended to believe just long enough to see if the math worked out. Sophia, on the other hand, thrived there. She had this effortless way of commanding a room. Her voice low, her eyes sharp, her confidence like a weapon. Sometimes I'd watch her from across the table as she spoke, the way she leaned forward, the way her lips moved when she was explaining numbers that could change everything. I'd tell myself it was admiration, not attraction. But the truth sat somewhere in between. She noticed things, too. The late nights when I wouldn't leave the lab. The way I stared at old photos of prototypes long scrapped. The dreams that still haunted me. And the ghosts of a past I refused to name. Once, after a long night calibrating a circuit, she caught me zoning out, staring at the glowing outlines of our prototype. "Where did you just go?" she asked softly. I hesitated. "Nowhere." She studied me for a moment, then said, "You ever going to tell me who she was?" I didn't look up. No one that matters. She didn't push further, just nodded and went back to her laptop, though the silence that followed was heavy. I respected her for that, the restraint, the way she could sense when to ask and when to let ghosts rest. Still, Rachel had a way of slipping through the cracks. Some nights, I'd dream of her, standing in that conference room, her words echoing through glass walls. "You're nothing but a failure in a cheap suit." Sometimes I'd wake up drenched in sweat, the sound of her laughter mingling with thunder. But those dreams didn't break me anymore. They fueled me. Every sneer, every insult became kindling for the fire I carried now. By the end of our second year, we had offices in 2 cities, a small team of engineers, and our first real investor contract. The day we signed it, Sophia popped a bottle of champagne. The bubbles overflowed onto the table, and she laughed, tilting the bottle toward me. "To new beginnings," she said. "To survival," I replied. We drank straight from the bottle, laughing like kids. There was music from someone's phone, low, rhythmic, and her hand found my arm for a second longer than necessary. When our eyes met, something passed between us, fragile and dangerous. But she broke the moment first, walking to the window. "You know," she said, "you could let yourself be happy once in a while." "I'll try when it feels safe." She turned, smiling faintly. Safe isn't how great things happen. She was right, but I still couldn't let go of the walls I'd built. Trust, to me, had become a kind of luxury, one I couldn't afford. We traveled often, pitching to companies and governments, eating cheap takeout in hotel rooms between meetings. Sometimes, when exhaustion blurred the edges, I'd catch her looking at me the way I once looked at Rachel, curious, searching, as if she wanted to understand the man behind the ambition. But I never let her in. Not fully. One night, after a failed pitch in Denver, we sat outside our hotel under a flickering sign. She passed me a cigarette, and I took it though I didn't smoke. The air smelled like wet asphalt. "You ever think you're doing all this to prove something?" she asked. "I know I am." "To who?" I exhaled. "A ghost." She nodded, eyes glinting. "Then make sure when you bury it, it stays buried." The next morning, we signed a small deal with a solar firm in New Mexico. Nothing huge, but enough to keep us alive. The victory felt earned, honest. Still, sometimes when I closed my eyes, I could see Rachel's face again, not in sadness anymore, but in defiance. As if even in my success, she refused to disappear completely. Her voice still whispered through my mind on bad days. "You're a failure, Daniel. You'll never be enough." But now, I'd whisper back, "Watch me." And each time, the fire burned brighter. When the email came through, I almost didn't believe it. Subject line: contract approval, Soltex Energy collaboration. I must have read it 5 times before I finally exhaled. We'd done it. Revita Energy had landed its first major partnership, a full-scale integration deal with one of the largest solar firms in Texas. Overnight, we went from a promising startup to an emerging name in renewable tech. Sophia was already in the office when I arrived, barefoot, her heels discarded beside her desk. She was pacing with her phone in one hand and a mug of coffee in the other. When she saw me, she grinned like the sun itself had decided to show up. "They signed?" I asked. "They signed," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. "Daniel, we're in." For a long moment, we just stood there, silent, stunned. Then she threw her arms around me. It wasn't calculated or professional. It was raw, spontaneous, real. I felt her heartbeat against my chest. Something about that warmth cut through every wall I'd built. We pulled apart, both pretending it hadn't lingered a second too long. That afternoon, the office felt alive. Our small team of 6 worked like we'd just been handed the keys to the future. There were cheers, cheap champagne, and endless plans being sketched on whiteboards. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to smile, a real one. The media caught on within days. Revita Energy Partners with Soltex for a Rural Sustainability Initiative. The engineer who started from nothing. From layoff to breakthrough. Daniel Hart's clean energy revolution. I didn't like the attention. I avoided interviews that tried to dig into my past, the failure years, the heartbreak, the collapse of Helios Dynamics. Sophia understood. She shielded me when she could, intercepting calls and politely declining invitations. Still, fame had a way of leaking through the cracks. One morning, while scrolling headlines, I saw a name I hadn't expected to see again. Marcus Ellington under investigation for financial fraud. Helios Dynamics had imploded. Accounts frozen, lawsuits piling up. Marcus's grin stared back at me from a thumbnail photo, the same smug confidence I remembered, now framed by flashing camera bulbs and court reporters. For a long time, I just stared at the article. There it was, poetic justice. The man who'd taken everything from me was finally crumbling. Sophia noticed me zoning out. "You okay?" I turned the screen toward her. She raised an eyebrow. "Your old company?" "Yeah," I said quietly. "The guy who, well, let's just say I don't owe him a drink." She studied me for a moment, then asked, "You don't seem happy about it." I thought about that. "I didn't build this to watch others fall," I said finally. "I built it so I'd never need anyone to catch me again." She smiled faintly. "That's unexpectedly poetic for you. I'm full of surprises." But the truth was, it didn't feel like victory. It felt hollow. Revenge, I realized, was a poor substitute for peace. That night, I stayed late in the office. The city lights flickered outside the window, reflections dancing across the glass. Sophia came by my desk, leaning against the doorframe. "You ever stop working?" "Not when I'm this close to making it better." She walked closer. The smell of her perfume mixed with the faint scent of ozone from the prototypes. "You already did make it better, Daniel. You turned the worst thing that ever happened to you into something beautiful." I looked at her then, really looked. The soft glow of the monitor painted her in blue light, her eyes warm, her hair slightly messy from a long day. She wasn't Rachel. She wasn't trying to be. She was something steadier. "You believe that?" I asked. "I've seen it," she replied. "And for the record, I'm proud of you." Those words hit deeper than I expected. Maybe because they were the exact opposite of what I'd been told years ago. Maybe because they were real. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us felt charged, not just with attraction, but something heavier, something unspoken. I broke the silence. "If we keep staring at each other like this, one of us is going to forget we're business partners." She smirked. "Then maybe you should stop staring first." But I didn't. Later that night, after she left, I sat alone by the window, the hum of the servers, like a heartbeat, beside me. I thought about everything. The rain-soaked streets of San Francisco, Rachel's contempt, Marcus's smug face, the years spent clawing my way back from nothing. And now here I was, alive, successful, stronger. But happiness still felt like something fragile, borrowed, temporary. I didn't sleep much. Instead, I worked until dawn, refining the next design, a scalable version of our core system. Each calculation, each circuit felt like defiance, a declaration that the man they once called a failure had built something no betrayal could destroy. When the sun rose, spilling gold across the floor, I finally leaned back and smiled. The current had turned. And this time, I was the one holding the power. 3 years after that first partnership, Revita Energy was no longer just a startup. It was an empire. Our new headquarters rose from the Austin skyline, a sleek glass structure wrapped in solar film, powered entirely by our own technology. Walking through its bright corridors each morning still felt surreal. I'd catch my reflection in the polished windows, a man in a tailored suit, confident, composed, and sometimes wonder when exactly he'd replace the broken engineer who once slept on an air mattress surrounded by blueprints. We had over 100 employees now. Investors lined up instead of turning us away. Our systems powered schools in rural Mexico, hospitals in South Africa, and research outposts in Iceland. The world was finally noticing, and it wasn't because of revenge or headlines. It was because the work spoke for itself. Sophia thrived in the spotlight. She was everywhere, magazine covers, panels, interviews. But she always made sure my name was beside hers. Whenever someone tried to crown her the face of Revita, she'd laugh and say, "No, that's Daniel. I'm just the one who makes sure he remembers to eat." We had become a seamless machine, partners in every sense except the one neither of us dared to mention. Our chemistry was undeniable. Meetings turned into debates, debates into laughter, laughter into something charged and unspoken. Sometimes, after long nights at the office, she'd pour us a drink, sit on the edge of my desk, and we'd talk, not about business, but about life, the past, what drove us. I could feel the space between us shrinking with each passing month. Yet, I never crossed that line. Maybe because part of me still carried the ghost of Rachel, and I wasn't ready to let someone new see the scars. Or maybe because I was afraid of losing the one thing that still felt pure, the partnership that had rebuilt me. The world saw me as a visionary now. Journalists called me the engineer who started from nothing. They wrote stories about resilience, redemption, the beauty of second chances. They loved the myth of it all, the rise from ruin. What they didn't see were the sleepless nights, the constant fear of failure, the quiet loneliness that success couldn't fill. Some nights, when the building emptied and I stood alone on the balcony overlooking the city, I'd think of her, Rachel. I hadn't seen her in years, but sometimes her voice still crept into my mind like static. "You're nothing but a failure in a cheap suit." I'd smile then, not bitterly, but with a strange calm, because that voice no longer cut deep. It reminded me of how far I'd come. One afternoon, during a mentoring event we hosted, I met a group of young engineers from a local university. They were wide-eyed, idealistic, full of impossible ideas. One of them, a kid barely 20, asked, "What's the secret, Mr. Hart? How do you become successful?" I looked at him, saw the version of myself I once was, naive, hungry, desperate to prove something. I smiled. "You stop chasing success," I said. "You chase purpose. Success follows when you forget it's the point." They clapped politely, but I could tell they didn't fully understand. I didn't blame them. Some lessons only come after losing everything. Sophia later teased me about the speech. "You sounded like a monk." "I've earned the wisdom," I said. "You've earned the wrinkles." We laughed. It was easy, comfortable, like breathing. But when her laughter faded, she looked at me differently, softer, almost tender. "You know, Daniel, I think you've finally forgiven yourself." I thought about that. Maybe she was right. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't a gift you gave others. It was something you eventually gave yourself when the pain stopped serving a purpose. Weeks later, I got a call from a journalist in San Francisco. They wanted me to speak at an innovation conference, the same city I'd left in ruins years ago. I hesitated at first, but Sophia convinced me. "You owe it to that version of yourself who thought he'd never stand again," she said. So I agreed. The morning of the flight, I stood before the mirror in my hotel room, adjusting my tie. The man looking back at me didn't seem nervous. He looked composed, assured, like someone who'd built his own redemption from dust. The conference was grand, chandeliers, flashing cameras, a sea of polished faces. When I stepped onto the stage, applause filled the hall. For a moment, I just stood there, letting it wash over me. Not for validation, but as acknowledgement of everything it took to get here. After the speech, people crowded around, investors, engineers, admirers. But none of them mattered. Because later that night, while scrolling through messages on my phone, one notification froze me in place. Rachel Harper liked your post. I stared at it for a long time, then locked the phone and slipped it into my pocket. She could watch. She could see everything I'd built, everything she said I never would. But she couldn't touch it. Not anymore. Outside, the city lights shimmered on the glass facade of our newest project, a Revita-powered tower glowing against the skyline. I smiled to myself, feeling that old ache fade completely. The empire was alive. And for the first time, I was too. San Francisco hadn't changed much. The same fog curled around the edges of skyscrapers, the same blend of ocean salt and exhaust in the air. But I had changed, and that made everything look different. It had been almost 5 years since I'd left the city, soaked in rain and humiliation. Now I was back to receive an award for innovation in sustainable energy. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same streets that had witnessed my collapse would now watch me walk back, as the man no one believed I could become. But while my life was blooming, another story was ending. Rachel Harper's name appeared again in my news feed a few weeks before the event, not as a headline, but in a quiet update from someone we once knew. Marcus Ellington had been arrested. Embezzlement, wire fraud, tax evasion. The whole poisonous cocktail. His company, Helios Dynamics, was officially bankrupt. The empire he'd stolen and built on deceit was finally burning to the ground. Rachel had disappeared from those glossy photos long before his arrest. There were whispers about her, that she'd been living off his money, that the investigation left her with nothing. The luxury car repossessed. The apartment emptied. The friends who'd once envied her now treated her like a cautionary tale. I tried not to think about her, but sometimes late at night I caught myself wondering what she saw when she thought of me. Did she remember the man she broke? Or the one who rebuilt himself without her? The night before the awards gala, I walked alone through the old streets, past the cafe where we used to sit, the corner store that sold her favorite wine. Every step felt like visiting a ghost. I half expected to see her reflection in the rain-slicked windows, wearing that same red dress from the company dinner, eyes sharp and unreadable. Instead, all I saw was my own reflection, older, steadier, unrecognizable to the man she once left behind. Somewhere across the city, Rachel was living her own version of ruin. She'd taken a job as a receptionist at a mid-tier marketing firm, answering phones for people younger than she was. Her coworkers barely spoke to her beyond necessity. Gone were the dinners, the designer dresses, the expensive smiles. Now, her mornings began with coffee from a paper cup and ended with cheap wine in a cramped studio apartment. Sometimes she scrolled through social media, just as she used to, but now the envy was sharper, colder. She saw her old friends posing in Bali, in Paris, in homes she could no longer afford to visit. And then one day, between pictures of sunsets and promotions, she saw my face. A photo from a tech magazine. Daniel Hart, founder and CEO of Revita Energy. I was standing beside Sophia, both of us in black suits, accepting an award at a global conference. I looked older, sharper. My smile wasn't boyish anymore. It was measured, confident. Rachel zoomed in on the image until her thumb trembled. For the first time in years, she whispered my name aloud. Daniel. Her voice cracked on it. The man she'd called a failure had become a symbol of success. The irony was so bitter, she almost laughed. She started following my company's updates quietly. Each post, new contracts, new expansions, cut a little deeper. And when the announcement came that Revita would be honored in San Francisco, she felt something twist in her chest. It wasn't just regret. It was the realization that the door she'd slammed shut would never open again. Maybe, she told herself, she'd just go. Not to interfere, not to beg. Just to see him. To see what became of the man she'd thrown away. The night of the gala, she stood before her mirror, trying on an old black dress that didn't fit quite like it used to. Her hair was shorter now, her makeup lighter. But her eyes, those were still the same. There was still a spark, though dulled by years of disappointment. Maybe he'll forgive me, she whispered to her reflection. Maybe he'll see that I was lost too. But forgiveness wasn't what she needed. Closure was. That evening, as the rain began to fall again, the same kind of rain that had once washed our story clean, I stood backstage at the grand ballroom, adjusting my cufflinks. Sophia was beside me, radiant calm. "You ready?" she asked. "As I'll ever be." The host's voice echoed through the speakers, calling my name. The applause swelled. I stepped out onto the stage, lights blinding, cameras flashing. And for a split second, through the glittering crowd, I saw her. Rachel. She stood near the back, almost hidden, her expression unreadable. Our eyes met, and time folded in on itself. I felt no anger, no ache, just quiet recognition. The strange peace of seeing a ghost and realizing it no longer haunts you. She looked at me the way someone looks at sunlight after living too long underground, with awe, with pain, with longing. Then the applause grew louder, pulling me back to the present. I smiled, nodded to the crowd, and took my place at the podium. Behind me, somewhere in the dim light, the ruins of my past watched silently as I spoke about the future. The grand ballroom glowed like a dream made of glass and gold. Crystal chandeliers hung above rows of white tables draped in linen, every corner gleaming under the slow dance of camera flashes. The air smelled of champagne and expensive ambition. It was the kind of room that used to make me feel small. Tonight, it felt like a stage I had already earned. Sophia walked beside me, radiant in a deep emerald dress that shimmered under the lights. She looked every bit the woman who'd built an empire with her bare hands. And with me, her arm brushed mine as we entered, and the photographers surged forward. "Smile, Daniel," she whispered under her breath. "You've earned it." So I did. Flashes went off, and for a few seconds, I was frozen in time, the face of Revita Energy, the engineer who had risen from failure to build something lasting. I thought of every night spent alone over blueprints, every word Rachel had thrown at me like stones. If she could see me now, I wondered what she would feel. Pity? Regret? Nothing at all? The crowd was full of familiar names: CEOs, investors, politicians. People who, not long ago, wouldn't have remembered my name if it wasn't on a rejected funding application. Now, they smiled like we'd been friends all along. Success had a way of rewriting history. We took our seats near the front. I could feel the pulse of the room: anticipation, admiration, envy. It all mixed together into a hum that made my chest tighten, though not from nerves. It was something else. Something like arrival. When the awards began, I clapped politely through the first few speeches, my mind wandering. Then, during a lull in conversation, a voice behind me said quietly, "Daniel." It was soft, hesitant, but unmistakable. I turned. Rachel. For a moment, everything around me blurred, the lights, the crowd, the clinking of glasses, all fading into silence. She stood there in a simple black dress, modest but elegant, her hair shorter now, her eyes older. Time had touched her, gently but noticeably. She looked human, real, not the unreachable fantasy I'd once built my life around. "Rachel," I said evenly. My own voice surprised me, steady, calm. "I didn't think you'd remember me," she said, a half-smile trembling on her lips. How could I forget? Her gaze flickered, caught between pride and shame. "You look different." "So do you." For a heartbeat, we just looked at each other. The weight of the past hung in the space between us like invisible smoke. "I came to see you," she admitted softly. "To see what became of you." "You're seeing it," I said, not unkindly. She opened her mouth, as if to apologize, but nothing came. Instead, she just sighed. "I never thought you'd make it, Daniel. Not because you couldn't, but because I didn't believe in anything anymore. I was lost." I studied her. The woman who once stood in a red dress beneath a glass ceiling, telling me I'd never be enough, was gone. In her place stood someone smaller, humbler, uncertain. And in that moment, I realized something simple but profound. I had already forgiven her. Not for her sake, but for mine. Before I could respond, Sophia's hand rested lightly on my shoulder. "They're calling you," she said, smiling. I nodded, then looked back at Rachel one last time. Take care of yourself, I said quietly. There was no anger in it, only closure. Then I turned toward the stage. The crowd fell silent as I walked up the steps, the sound of my shoes echoing against marble. The host shook my hand, handed me the award, a solid glass prism that caught the light and scattered it across the hall. For a brief second, the reflection of it passed over Rachel's face in the crowd. I took the microphone, adjusted it, and looked out at hundreds of faces waiting for words. Failure, I began, isn't the end of story. It's the spark that starts the next chapter. A soft murmur rippled through the crowd. I continued. When I first came to this city, I thought success was about being seen, about being admired, respected, envied. But I learned that success isn't applause, it's endurance. It's choosing to stand back up when everything in you wants to stay down. It's the quiet moments of creation, the belief that your work can mean something, even when no one else believes it yet. I paused, catching Sophia's eyes in the front row. She was smiling, proud, glowing. I built Revita Energy because I wanted to change how people think about power. But the truth is, power isn't just electricity. Power is resilience. Power is starting again when the world writes you off. Power, I said, lifting the prism slightly, is knowing who you are after the storm passes. Applause filled the room, warm and thunderous. I stepped back, heart steady, mind clear. When I glanced toward the back, Rachel was gone. Maybe she'd slipped away quietly. Maybe she couldn't bear to stay. Either way, it didn't matter. The ghost had left the building. Sophia met me at the edge of the stage, eyes glistening. "You were incredible," she whispered. "Thank you," I said, "for everything." The music swelled, the lights softened, and for the first time since I could remember, I felt completely at peace. The storm that began in that glass conference room years ago had finally run out of rain, and all that was left was light. The morning after the gala, Austin greeted me with sunlight. Golden, patient sunlight spilling across the glass walls of Revita's headquarters. The city felt alive in a way San Francisco never had. Open skies, clean air, possibility in every direction. I stood on the balcony of my office, coffee in hand, watching the reflection of our solar panels glitter across the skyline. Sophia joined me quietly. She never knocked. "You didn't sleep, did you?" I smiled faintly. "I stopped needing sleep a long time ago." She stepped beside me, leaning against the railing. The wind caught her hair, and for a second, the morning light painted her in gold. "You were brilliant last night. That speech, you silenced a room full of people who think they've heard everything. Maybe they were just surprised I kept it under 10 minutes. She laughed softly. "You're impossible." We stood there in silence, listening to the hum of the city below. It wasn't awkward. It was the kind of quiet that feels earned. Years of struggle, failure, and rebuilding had carved out this peace between us. "You saw her, didn't you?" Sophia finally asked. I didn't pretend not to know who she meant. "Yeah." She nodded, eyes thoughtful. "How did it feel?" I took a long breath. The truth came easier than I expected. Like reading an old book and realizing you don't care about the ending anymore. She smiled. "That's poetic. Just honest." The wind shifted. A faint vibration from the panels hummed through the balcony rails. That low, comforting sound of energy flowing, constant, alive. It reminded me of the heartbeat I'd lost years ago, and somehow found again in circuits, wires, and stubborn belief. Sophia looked at me with that calm intensity she always carried. "You could have destroyed her, you know. Publicly. You could have told the world everything. The affair. The betrayal. I thought about it once," I admitted. "But then I realized revenge keeps you tied to the person who broke you. I didn't want to orbit her anymore. I wanted my own gravity." She smiled faintly. "You've built an entire universe instead." For a moment, our eyes met. There was warmth there, more than admiration, more than partnership. Something unspoken, something that had been building between us for years. I could feel it in the space between breaths. She broke the silence first, whispering, "Do you ever think about what comes next?" "All the time," I said. "But I'm done chasing ghosts. I just want to build something that lasts." "And if it's not just the company?" she asked softly. I turned to her. The city spread out behind us like an ocean of light. Then I'll build that too. Her hand brushed mine, tentative, deliberate. And for the first time since Rachel, I didn't pull away. The contact was simple, grounding, real. We stood there for a long time, saying nothing. The hum of the panels filled the air, the sound of creation rather than destruction. Later that afternoon, we walked through the lab together. Engineers tested prototypes. Interns hurried between desks. Monitors glowed with graphs and data streams. Everywhere I looked, I saw movement, growth, innovation, hope. This, I said quietly, is what I always wanted Helios to be, what I thought it could be. Sophia smiled. It's better, because this time it's yours. She was right. I had spent years thinking I needed to prove something, to Rachel, to Marcus, to the world. But success without peace is just another kind of prison. What mattered now wasn't revenge or redemption, it was meaning. That evening, when the last employee left, I stood in the empty office, the setting sun turning the glass walls into mirrors. I saw my reflection, older, sharper, but finally whole. I thought about that night in the rain when I'd walked away from everything. The pain, the loss, the disbelief. If someone had told me then that I'd end up here, building an empire from ruins, finding peace in the aftermath, I wouldn't have believed them. But pain has a strange way of refining you. It burns away what's false and leaves only what's essential. As darkness fell, the city below came alive, every building lit softly by the energy Revita provided. The glow spread like veins of gold across Austin, silent proof that from failure can come light. Sophia appeared in the doorway again, her silhouette framed by the orange dusk. Still working. Just thinking, I said. About her? I shook my head, smiling, only to remind myself how far I've come. She stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. Then don't look back anymore. I won't, I said. And I meant it. Outside, the wind shifted again, humming through the panels, through the glass, through me. It sounded almost like a song, quiet, endless, reborn. The light wasn't vengeance anymore. It was peace. And peace, I realized, was the truest kind of victory. 6 months passed after the gala, and life settled into a rhythm that felt almost foreign in its simplicity. No chaos, no drama, just the steady hum of creation. Revita continued to grow, expanding into markets I'd only dreamed of when all this began. We opened new research hubs in Singapore and Berlin, signed contracts across continents. Yet somehow, my favorite moments were still the quiet ones, the mornings before sunrise, when the world felt half asleep and the office lights glowed like stars. It was during one of those early mornings that I found myself standing in front of our mission statement etched into the lobby glass. To rebuild, renew, and reimagine the energy that connects us. I'd written those words in a cheap notebook years ago, on the same night I'd packed my suitcase and left San Francisco behind. Back then, I had no idea they would one day tower in 6-foot letters above an empire. Sophia walked in, heels echoing softly on the marble floor. She was reading something on her tablet, but smiled when she saw me. You're here early again. Habit, I said. It's hard to sleep when your brain won't shut up. She chuckled. That's how I know you're happy. You start building things in your head before breakfast. We shared coffee on the balcony, as always. Below us, the city stretched wide, alive with morning light. The hum of traffic mixed with the faint buzz of the solar grids awakening with the sun. For the first time in years, the sound didn't remind me of what I'd lost. It reminded me of everything I'd gained. You ever think about how it all started? Sophia asked. That night you walked into that co-working space, just you, a laptop, and a dream. Sometimes, I said, it feels like another lifetime, another man. She looked at me for a long moment, then said quietly, he'd be proud of who you became. I smiled at that. He'd probably just ask how the hell we managed to pull it off. We both laughed. But there was something deeper in her gaze, something that had been growing between us for a long time. Neither of us said it, but it was there, the quiet recognition of love that didn't need to rush, that didn't need to prove itself. It was the kind that grew from trust, not passion alone. Later that week, we attended a launch event for our new modular grid design, Revita Lightstream. The room was full of reporters and partners, but as I spoke on stage, my eyes kept finding hers in the crowd. She smiled like she always did when she wanted to steady me, calm, sure, certain that I would never falter again. After the presentation, we stayed behind as the hall emptied. The prototypes still glowed softly on display, little boxes of light humming quietly in the dark. Sophia stood beside one, her fingers tracing the polished metal. You realize what this means, don't you? Revita is global now. We're changing entire countries. Not bad for two people who started in a warehouse, I said. Not bad at all. She turned to face me. So what's next? I thought about it, not the projects or contracts, but life itself. Maybe we stop running, I said finally. Maybe we just live. She smiled. I'd like that. That night, I drove home alone through the quiet streets. Austin's skyline shimmered in the rearview mirror, panels gleaming like constellations. Every streetlight, every glowing window reminded me that my story had been rebuilt from the same raw material as those lights. Persistence, resilience, faith in something unseen. When I reached my apartment, I found an envelope slipped under my door. No return address, no markings. Inside was a single handwritten note. I'm glad you found your light. I'm sorry for everything. R. I sat there for a long time, the note trembling slightly in my hand. No bitterness came, no anger, not even nostalgia. Just a strange sense of gratitude. The story had come full circle, and for the first time, there was nothing left to say. I folded the paper neatly and placed it in the drawer with my old blueprints, relics of a past that no longer hurt. Then I poured a drink, stepped out onto the balcony, and let the night wind move through me. From up there, the city stretched out like an ocean of stars. Somewhere among them, Rachel existed, a life parallel to mine, a memory turned human again. I wished her peace, silently, and let her go for good. When I turned back, I caught my reflection in the glass door, older, steadier, unburdened. For the first time, I didn't see the man defined by betrayal or redemption. I saw someone simply living, someone free. The lights from the panels flickered faintly in the distance, forming ripples across the dark horizon. The world was still imperfect, still broken in places, but now I understood something I hadn't before. It didn't need to be perfect. It just needed people willing to rebuild it. And maybe somewhere between the ruins and the light, we all get the chance to begin again.